I never believed in the supernatural. Ghosts, aliens, monsters, just tales told to scare children or entertain the gullible. But that all changed one cold, moonless night in late October. I had just finished a late shift at the hospital and was driving home through the empty streets of our sleepy little town. It was around 1 a.m., and the air was crisp, with a slight hint of frost beginning to form on the edges of the windshield. The road was deserted, and the only sound was the soft hum of my car's engine. As I approached the outskirts of town, I saw them. 2 children standing by the side of the road, illuminated by my headlights. They were about 10 or 11 years old, a boy and a girl. Their clothes were odd, as if they were dressed for a different era, plain, old-fashioned outfits that seemed out of place. Something about them made me uneasy, but I couldn't just drive past. It was late, and they looked like they needed help. I slowed down and rolled down the passenger window. "Hey, are you kids all right?" I called out. The girl stepped forward, her face pale and expressionless. "We need a ride," she said in a monotone voice. A chill ran down my spine. Her eyes, now fully visible in the glow of the headlights, were completely black. No whites, no iris, just an endless, dark void. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the gear shift. "Where are your parents? Do you live around here?" The boy stepped forward then, his eyes the same unsettling black as the girl's. "We need a ride," he repeated, his voice devoid of any emotion. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, to get away from these children as fast as I could. But something else, a sense of duty, perhaps, compelled me to help. They were just kids, after all. Maybe they were sick, or it was some kind of prank. "Okay," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Get in." They climbed into the back seat, moving in unison, and I couldn't help but notice how cold the air seemed to become with them inside the car. I started driving, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror where I could see their dark eyes staring back at me. "Where do you need to go?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just drive," the girl replied. The car filled with an oppressive silence as I drove on. The feeling of dread grew stronger with each passing minute, and I began to regret my decision. What had I gotten myself into? I tried to make small talk, asking their names, where they were from, but they remained silent, their gaze never wavering. After what felt like an eternity, I couldn't take it anymore. "Listen, if you don't tell me where you need to go, I'll have to drop you off at the police station." For the first time, the boy spoke. "No police. Just drive." I decided I had had enough. I pulled over to the side of the road, intending to tell them to get out. But when I turned around, the back seat was empty. The children were gone, as if they had never been there. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a deep, unsettling fear. I checked the doors, still locked from the inside. I looked around, but there was no sign of them anywhere. I floored the accelerator and drove home as fast as I could, the image of those black eyes burned into my mind. That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, felt their cold presence. I told myself it was just a hallucination, a trick of the light, or my tired mind playing games with me. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong. And as the nights grew longer and the shadows deeper, I began to sense that this was just the beginning. A week passed since that unsettling encounter. I tried to go about my daily life, convincing myself that it had been a figment of my exhausted imagination. But the memory of those black eyes haunted me, lurking at the edges of my mind. One evening, as I settled into my favorite armchair with a book, I heard a faint knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced at the clock, it was just past midnight. Who could be visiting at this hour? I hesitated, debating whether to ignore it, but the knocking persisted, growing more insistent. Reluctantly, I put down my book and approached the door. Peering through the peephole, I saw no one. A sense of unease washed over me. I opened the door a crack, just enough to peer outside. The porch light flickered, casting eerie shadows, but there was no one in sight. I stepped out onto the porch, scanning the darkness. That's when I heard it, a soft, childlike whisper. "We need to come in." I turned slowly, and there they were, standing at the edge of the porch. The same children, the same black eyes. Their faces were devoid of emotion, their skin pale and almost translucent in the dim light. "How did you find me?" I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to come in," the girl repeated, her voice cold and hollow. Every instinct screamed at me to slam the door and lock it, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. The boy took a step forward, his eyes never leaving mine. "Please, let us in." "I can't," I said, my voice trembling. "You need to leave." Their expressions remained unchanged, but a palpable sense of menace filled the air. "We need to come in," the girl insisted. Summoning all my courage, I backed away and shut the door, locking it securely. I turned off the porch light and retreated to the living room, my heart pounding. Through the window, I could see their silhouettes standing motionless on the porch. I called the police, my hands shaking as I dialed. When they arrived, the children were gone, vanished into the night as if they had never been there. The officers took my statement, but I could tell they were skeptical, attributing my story to stress and exhaustion. That night, sleep was out of the question. I kept every light in the house on, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. I knew they would be back. The question was when. Days turned into nights filled with restless vigilance. I researched everything I could about the black-eyed children, finding stories and encounters eerily similar to mine. They always seemed to appear at night, bringing with them a sense of dread and fear. One detail stood out: those who encountered them often faced misfortune or tragedy soon after. I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had been marked by these mysterious beings. Then, one night, as I sat in the dim glow of my computer screen, I heard it again. The knock. This time, it was more forceful, more insistent. They were back. And this time, I feared, they wouldn't leave so easily. I didn't answer the door. Instead, I turned off the lights and sat in the darkness, hoping they would go away. But the knocking continued, relentless and rhythmic. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited, every second stretching into an eternity. "Let us in," the voices whispered through the door, their tone more demanding now. The coldness in their words seeped into my bones, chilling me to the core. I grabbed my phone and called my friend Sarah, who lived a few blocks away. She was one of the few people who believed my story. "Sarah, they're back," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Stay inside. I'm coming over," she replied, her voice filled with concern. While waiting for her, I paced the living room, trying to distract myself from the incessant knocking. My mind raced with thoughts of what these children wanted, why they had chosen me. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. Silence filled the air, but it was a heavy, oppressive silence. I peeked out the window, but there was no sign of them. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. A few minutes later, Sarah arrived. I let her in, and we sat together, trying to make sense of what was happening. "You can stay here tonight," she offered. "We'll figure this out together." I nodded, grateful for her support. We spent the night in the living room, talking in hushed tones and jumping at every noise. As the first light of dawn broke through the curtains, I finally felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe they wouldn't come back in daylight. The next few days were uneventful, but the fear never left me. I installed extra locks on the doors and windows, trying to create a sense of security. Sarah and I kept in close contact, always checking in on each other. One evening, I decided to go for a walk to clear my mind. The streets were quiet, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink as the sun set. As I turned a corner, I saw them again. The children stood at the end of the street, watching me with their soulless black eyes. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear their footsteps behind me, quick and deliberate. I didn't dare look back. I raced to Sarah's house, pounding on her door frantically. She let me in, her eyes wide with fear. "What happened?" "They're here," I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. They followed me. We locked the doors and windows, checking every possible entry point. The night stretched on, filled with an unbearable tension. We could hear them outside, whispering, knocking, always asking to be let in. Exhausted and terrified, I finally fell into a fitful sleep on Sarah's couch. I dreamt of those black eyes, of the cold and the dread they brought with them. In my dream, they were inside the house, standing over me, their faces expressionless. I woke with a start, my heart racing. Sarah was already up, looking just as tired and scared as I felt. "We can't keep living like this," she said. "We need to find out what they want." "But how? How do you communicate with something that isn't human, that brings only fear and darkness?" We had no answers, only more questions. And the sense that this was far from over. As the days turned into weeks, the encounters became more frequent, more intense. The children would appear at random times, always asking to be let in, always filling the air with a sense of dread. We were living in a nightmare, one that had no end in sight. And deep down, I knew the worst was yet to come. It was late November when I finally reached my breaking point. The encounters were now happening almost every night. Sarah and I were exhausted, barely functioning. We had to do something, anything, to end this nightmare. Desperation led us to contact a local paranormal investigator named Greg. He had a reputation for dealing with the unexplainable, and we hoped he could offer some insight. Greg arrived one cold evening, his demeanor calm and reassuring. He listened to our story without judgment, nodding thoughtfully. "These children, or whatever they are, thrive on fear," Greg said. "They want you to let them in. That's the key. But once you do, there's no turning back." "What happens if we let them in?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Honestly, I don't know. And I wouldn't want to find out," Greg admitted. "But we can try to communicate with them, see if we can find out what they want." That night, Greg set up his equipment in my living room, cameras, audio recorders, and an array of strange-looking devices. We waited in tense silence, the hours crawling by. Just past midnight, the familiar knock echoed through the house. Greg signaled us to stay calm. He approached the door, his face composed. "What do you want?" he called out firmly. There was no response, just the relentless knocking. Greg repeated his question, louder this time. "What do you want?" The whispers started then, chilling and indecipherable. Greg turned to us, motioning for quiet. "We won't let you in," he said, his voice steady. "Tell us what you want." The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices, and then it happened. The children's faces appeared at the window, their black eyes staring into the room. The air turned icy, the sense of dread overwhelming. "We need to come in," they chorused, their voices blending into one. Greg stood his ground. "No. Not until you tell us why." For a moment, the whispers ceased. The children's expressions remained blank, but there was a flicker of something else, something almost human. Then, in a voice that sent shivers down my spine, the girl spoke. "We were lost. We need to come in." "Lost?" Greg pressed. "What do you mean?" The boy stepped forward, his face almost pressed against the glass. "We need to come in. Please." There was a pause, a moment of unbearable tension. Greg glanced back at us, his resolve wavering. "If we let you in, will you leave us alone?" The children nodded in unison, their eyes never leaving his. Against every instinct, Greg slowly unlocked the door and opened it. The children stepped inside, the air turning even colder. They stood in the middle of the room, silent and still. Greg approached them cautiously. "Why are you here? What do you need?" "We need to go home," the girl said, her voice soft and sorrowful. "Where is home?" Greg asked. The children exchanged a glance, and then, as if by some unspoken agreement, they turned and walked towards the back door. We followed them outside, into the darkness. They led us to the edge of the woods, where a thick fog had begun to form. "This is where we go," the boy said, pointing into the fog. "Thank you." With that, they walked into the mist, their figures fading until they were completely gone. The air began to warm, the oppressive feeling lifting. It was over. Greg turned to us, his face pale but relieved. "I think they were trapped here, lost between worlds. By acknowledging them, by understanding their need, we helped them find their way home." We stood there in silence, the weight of the experience settling over us. The nightmare was finally over, but the memory of those black eyes would stay with us forever. We had faced our fear and found a way through, but the encounter had left its mark. As we walked back to the house, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in weeks. The black-eyed children were gone, but their story would live on, a chilling reminder of the unknown lurking just beyond the veil of our understanding.